So let's move on to Sutra 117. We're still talking all about focus here. In Sutra 117, it says there are 4 stages of focus that make up the process of achieving the lowest level of samadhi. These 4 stages are: 1. Examine the form of an object. 2. Reflect on the subtle characteristics of the object. 3. Experience joy or bliss. And 4. Identify as I with the object of focus. This process of focus must be applied to one thing only. Okay, so now we're getting a little bit more esoteric, and we're going to break this down together. The first thing I want to say about this particular sutra is that it introduces 4 stages of focus. And this is really important because the Yoga Sutra does this again and again and again. It introduces levels, stages, steps. And the reason why I think this is so important is because it's allowing us to be at the beginning of the journey. It perhaps presents the end goal, in this case, samadhi, and we'll get into samadhi in a whole nother week here because that's a conversation in and of itself. But the Yoga Sutra, Patanjali presents samadhi as the end goal, the whole reason why we might be practicing yoga or what we're working towards. And people can get really caught up in that because our Western mind, it likes having goals. It likes understanding that, okay, this is our yoga practice, and the reason we're practicing this is because we're trying to get to point B. And we're starting at point A, and here's the route that we're going to take to get to point B. And our Western mind and our society today expects that while, yes, we might acknowledge we're starting at point A, we want to get to point B as fast as we possibly can. We want the quickest and easiest way to get there, and we want it yesterday. So we're not necessarily willing to take the time that it requires to take long journeys. And the practice of yoga is a long journey. So Patanjali makes clear throughout the text that we have to progress in stages. We have to take step 1, and we have to take step 1 before we get to step 2. And we have to take step 1 and 2 before we get to step 3, and so on and so forth. So the reason why I think that this is really freeing, actually, is because if we are at stage 1, it's okay. We have to start there. We all have to start at stage 1. There is nothing wrong with being at stage 1. Being at stage 1 does not mean that you are not a yogi. It just means that you're on stage 1. And if you're at stage 2, it doesn't mean that you're any more advanced necessarily. It simply means that you've done the work of stage 1 and you've progressed onto stage 2 and you're still on the path. And we can all be on our own path at different places practicing the same thing. And we can do it together or we can do it alone. But there are stages, there are steps, and no matter where you are, we all have to go through the steps most of the time in chronological order. Patanjali doesn't give a lot of caveats or a lot of examples where you might bypass some of the steps. So when we're developing focus, which is really hard to do for so many of us, Patanjali says there's 4 stages to developing this skill we call focus. And the stages of focus required for achieving samadhi, and look here, the lowest level of samadhi. So the end goal of yoga, samadhi, that in and of itself has different stages and levels. So we can be practicing focus just to get to the lowest level of samadhi. And then once we get there, there's still a bunch of other levels of samadhi that we have yet to achieve too. So we don't have to get so caught up in this idea of, oh no, I'm not achieving samadhi. Well, which level of samadhi are you talking about? We have to be clear on that. And perhaps you didn't even know that there were different levels. And again, we'll get there in a different week. We got to start with the basics at step 1. So there's 4 stages of focus that make up the process for achieving just the lowest level of samadhi. And those 4 stages are: 1, examine the form of an object. So we're going to take these 4 steps and apply them to an example. And since we teach asana-based classes, or we practice asana, let's use asana as the example. First, we need to examine the form of the object. Now remember, Patanjali is presenting these steps and these skills in regards to a meditation practice. So when you're examining the form of an object, he's talking specifically about how we would examine the form of the object that we are choosing for meditation. So when we are meditating, according to Patanjali, we have to choose one object of focus, and that object of focus can be anything. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But for this example, I'm going to say, let's say we're in an asana class, and we are going to examine our body and a particular sensation in our body. So that sensation in our body, let's say our foot. We're going to examine the feeling of our foot against the ground. So that's going to be the form of the object. The gross form of that object is the feeling of our foot against the ground. And we're going to spend some time really focusing on just pushing our foot into the ground. That's level one. And for some of us, just focusing on pressing our foot into the ground for an extended period of time can be really challenging. So let's say we're standing just in a Tadasana, and we're thinking about all of our mind's energy is going to pressing our foot into the ground. We might be able to do that for 5 seconds, for 2 seconds, for 1 second. But once we get to like 30 seconds, it's hard to maintain our focus of just thinking about nothing else except pushing our foot into the ground for longer than, maybe even 5 seconds. After we get really good at maintaining our focus, keeping all of our energy in our feet, then we can go to the next more subtle layer, which here is reflecting on the subtle characteristics of that object. So the object is pressing our foot into the ground. Now, what are the more subtle characteristics of that? What are the sensations that are arising out of pressing our foot into the ground? When we can focus on that, not just the gross action of pressing the foot into the ground, but now that we have been focusing on that for a while, some new sensations might arise. They have to be sensations directly related to pressing the foot into the ground. But now we're kind of moving into this more subtle realm. What else is coming up here? How are these feelings evolving? This helps us remain really present. And that presence helps us go a layer deeper into the more subtle realm of the action of pressing the foot into the ground. From there, that naturally gives way to the third stage, which is experiencing joy or bliss. Because once we get into that more subtle realm and those more subtle sensations, we allow that to naturally give way to a sensation of joy or bliss, which is a direct result of experiencing presence, being really present with the sensation of pressing the foot into the ground. At this point, we're not actively thinking about the action of pressing the foot into the ground. We're not even actively thinking about the sensations, the subtle sensations arising from that action. We've allowed our thoughts to be overtaken by a deep sense of joy or bliss that is a result of presence, being so present with that one focus point, that one object of focus. And finally, that naturally gives way to this fourth step, identify as I with the object of focus. This trips people up all the time because a lot of times people think that this means they become the action of pressing their foot into the ground, or they become the object of focus. A common object of focus used in examples for meditation practice is concentrate on the flame of a candle. And so if we were to just really quickly run through these levels, 1, examine the form of an object. You're examining the form of the flame. 2, reflect on the subtle characteristics of the object. You start to reflect on the subtle sensations or characteristics of the flame. 3, experience joy or bliss. That gives way to that presence. And 4, identify as I with the object of focus. Whoa, wait a minute. Does that mean I become the flame? No. It doesn't mean that you become the flame or you become the candle or you become the action of pressing your foot into the ground. It simply means that that experience of presence or joy or bliss gives way to an experience of oneness, where you can no longer differentiate between the separate characteristics of the candle flame or the separate characteristics of the action of pressing your feet into the ground. There is no separateness anymore. You are just experiencing that oneness, which allows you to no longer identify yourself as a separate I, a separate being from the characteristics of your object of focus. You are the action of pressing your feet into the ground. There is no difference. And yes, this is a little strange, but it is this necessary shedding of our identity, of our ego, that allows us to find this oneness that brings forth a peace, a sense of calm, a sense of serenity, a sense of union. And that's really where we get this idea of yoga is union, is right here, where we let go of our identity as a separate I. I am Ashley and I am separate from you. And we understand at this most subtle level that I, Ashley, am made up of all of the same energies as you, whoever you are, or as the candle flame, or as a table, or as the action of pressing our feet into the ground, that we are all working in a world that has the same energies, and they're just taking different manifestations at different times. Now, what I want to share here is that step 1 and step 2 are active steps. We can kind of like actively focus on the form of the object. And there is even a little bit of an action where we can allow ourselves to slip into and notice some of the more subtle characteristics of that object. But step 3 and 4 aren't actions that you're taking per se. They're actions that are being allowed by you. You are allowing yourself to slip into an experience of joy or bliss, but you're not actively doing anything or adding on to your experience. You're letting go so that you are able to experience the joy or the bliss. You are letting go so that you are able to experience the oneness, the union. So we start by actively doing something, actively focusing on one object of meditation, but we end by letting go. And I think that that's really important. We have to let go of our tension. We have to let go of the things that we are gripping onto, the identities that we are gripping onto, in order for us to reach this lowest level of samadhi. And that is also part of these stages of focus. That's also part of this skill called focus. It's letting go. Yes, we're actively practicing to focus the mind, but there's an element of release that is required there too, and that's where we find the paradox. And yoga, as we probably all know, is full of paradox. There's a little reminder at the end of this sutra. This process of focus must be applied to one thing only, and Patanjali reminds us of that over and over again. If we are going to practice focus, one thing and one thing only. You focus on pressing your feet into the ground, and that's all you focus on. You practice on staring at that candle, and that's all you focus on. And you maintain that object of focus for as long as you can so that you're able to master these stages of focus. And what this reminds me of is something that one of my golf coaches told me once. So I played golf in high school, and golf is kind of one of those sports where you can go to 5 different coaches and every single one of them is going to tell you something different about your swing. And if you go to 5 different coaches to try and fix your golf swing, you're going to totally mess up your golf swing. It's really best to stick with one person and one technique and master it before you then decide to tweak little things here and there, rather than trying to get advice from everyone and cobble it all together to create something different or new. Stick with one thing, Stick with it for a while. That requires focus in and of itself. And go with that until you feel like you've gained some mastery. This is why in meditation practice, it's nice to have one meditation technique that you personally utilize that really resonates with you. There are many different meditation techniques out there, and there's not one that's right or wrong, but there is one that is right for you, that really works best for you. And then it's a good idea to stick with that and keep practicing that until you feel like you've come into some sense of mastery with it before you try and switch things up. Or maybe you never even have a need to switch things up at all. But Patanjali keeps reminding us over and over again, focus. Focus as best you can.